Hi, everyone. So one very important aspect of Jewish thought, especially today, we're going to try and look at is the Jewish view of happiness. And really, it's a universal issue, challenge, whatever it may be, that the human being human beings do a variety of things, an enormous variety of things. If you take right now a snapshot of human beings all over the world, there's people playing sport, and there's people going on travel, there's people going out to work, and there's people signing up for a military somewhere, there's people, it's just, we're going shopping and hanging out on a computer, staying in bed. There's just such an array of activities. But when we start to ask ourselves a question like, what is or are the deep common denominators that drive all the things humans do? So one obvious driver is survival. Survival drives all of our biological needs, from nutrition and reproduction, warmth and shelter, and so on. But it doesn't drive everything we do. We do lots of things that are not very helpful for survival, things that are neutral, and the things that are actually quite bad. Some people are drinking, some people are smoking, some people driving cars very quickly, some people are jumping out of airplanes, some people are usually with a parachute, but some people are doing risky sports, some are signing up for military. Those are not great for survival. So not everything we do is about survival. In fact, a lot of what we do has nothing to do with survival or even detrimental to survival. Love, meaning, there's lots of things we do that are common denominators of lots of behavior. But if we try and get even deeper, grand unifying common denominator, it's going to be captured in this cluster of English words, something like pleasure, happiness, fulfillment, and satisfaction. Something like that captures everything humans are trying to do in all that they do all the days of their life. So the person who's going shopping, the person who's signing up for an army, the person who's jumping out of an airplane, the person who's going to work, the person who's studying for exams, it's all this calculus. Sometimes we are conflicted. We have choices. Which one's going to be better? Sometimes we have short-term versus long-term. Sometimes it's an immediate pleasure versus a delayed pleasure. Sometimes we regret the choice we made and think we made a mistake, and so forth. So do I get out of bed, or do I stay? Well, staying in bed right now feels better, but getting out of bed may produce longer-term life positive consequences, and so forth. So that seems to drive pretty much everything we're trying to do. And then we ask ourselves, well, how many opportunities are there in the world for such fulfillment? And the truth is, it's enormous. I mean, it's endless. If you just did an experiment, a few people together to try to work out 100 possible different activities that could give some human being somewhere some happiness, it probably wouldn't take very long, maybe a minute or two just to do that. 1,000 activities might take us 10 minutes, 20 minutes, I don't know how long. But the world is jam-packed full of such possibilities. And yet, remarkably, at least in the world where there's no longer, at least parts of the world where starvation is not an issue, which is the vast, vast majority of humanity, this should be a world full of beaming, happy people with lives who are happy, pleasurable, fulfilled, or satisfied. And yet, it's remarkable how many people would report their lives are not happy, pleasurable, fulfilled, or satisfied. Now, it's notoriously difficult to measure, largely because it's quite subjective. How do you ask that question? I think there's indices that produce a gross national happiness, which often don't even ask questions like how happy people are. You just guess it. It must be a society with this income per capita, this type of healthcare, this type must be happy. But I'll tell you anecdotally, this is because I do teach lots of different age groups. If you ask teenagers what percentage of the world they think are happy, so you always get ranges of answers, but younger teenagers tend to give quite high answers, 50%, sometimes higher. If you ask, in my experience, older teens, especially college-age students, university-age students, the numbers drop. It's very typical that people say 25%. If you ask people who just started working, it's very typical you get 10%. And you find like somewhere in the late 20s, you sometimes get people saying 0%, and that's like a worrying thing. I think it might rebound later. And there is interesting research on it. We're not doing a course now. There's a lot of material in positive psychology, the science of happiness, a lot of good literature worth reading. What I want to do is explore two particularly powerful Jewish insights that work together that might help shed light on this issue and framing of a lot of Jewish thought and practice as well. Insight number one is there's a hierarchy of needs. Now, those who studied psychology might have heard of a similar concept by a fellow called Abraham Maslow, who came up with a hierarchy of needs. He was Jewish, but I'm not sure if he drew his idea from the Jewish tradition. Within the Jewish tradition is a hierarchy of needs that I think goes further than his does. The concept that there's lower needs and higher needs, and you need to really fulfill them all, but especially higher needs are really critical to deeper forms of happiness. Now, to understand this slightly more metaphysically, if I asked you the question, do you know or think that Judaism has the concept of a soul within the Jewish thought tradition? Most people are going to answer yes, they've heard of that idea. They might think the soul is some kind of wispy little ghosty thing that pops into the head or something. That's probably not the Jewish idea, but we're not talking about the metaphysics of things like that now. What's more interesting is this question, and this less people get right. You ask, in the Jewish tradition, how many levels of the soul are there? First of all, lots of people have never heard the concept there's levels of the soul. And then people will say 3 or 7 or good Jewish numbers. It turns out in most books that speak about it, there's 5, based on 5 biblical words for the soul. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. There's other words used for them as well. If you don't know the Hebrew, that's not going to be crucial for this talk. Leave the metaphysics aside. One of its manifestations is that within all of us are 5 different categories of needs in ascending order. And we're going to talk about all of them soon. The second insight is that for any need we have, there are 3 options. Number 1, we fulfill the need and something inside us feels fulfilled, happy, pleasurable, fulfilled, satisfied. Number 2, we ignore it and we feel unfulfilled, unhappy, unsatisfied, and so on. And number 3 is perhaps the most common. We grab at the nearest counterfeit. Something that feels like it's going to fulfill us, but actually does not. And now we're going to look at each of these needs, what the needs are and what the counterfeits are. This concept, I believe, was first put together in the 20th century by Rabbi Noach Weinberg, but its roots and sources go very deep into the tradition of these as the souls.